Hello everybody, welcome to a video on Les Revenants, or The Returned, which it translates at. This is for the Eduqas A-Level Media Studies specification. I'm primarily focusing on representation, which is the advanced information we've been given for this year's exam, but it will be useful for subsequent years, just in case you want to revise representation in Les Revenants. First things first, one of our key points we have to consider is our first representation theorist, Stuart Hall. All right, Stuart Hall believed that representation is the process by which members of a culture use language to produce meaning. All right, and he says that these producers will produce this meaning, and they do this through the organisation of signs which we use to understand and describe the world we live in. And then we place these into a wider set of values and ideologies. However, he's very vocal in the fact that these are not fixed. These chop and change with time. They vary from where you are, who you are, what your background is, and they are defined by the society. But they are definitely not a fixed notion. He further states that for stereotypes to be understood, we, the audience, need to have this shared conceptual roadmap in order to make sense of these mediated signs and subsequent stereotypes. If we're not aligned with the producer, if we come from maybe a different background, we aren't exposed to what everybody else is exposed to, it's a case of we won't recognise these stereotypes. I mean, not every single culture and background will perceive that someone who's wearing glasses within a group of people is necessarily the geek, for example. So it's a case of just taking a step back and going, what is the producer expecting us to see from this? And we might not get it, depending on what's being shown to us, but usually the producer's producing a text within an environment that they're aware of and that they presume will be recognised by the audience. We're going to look at the representation of females. We're going to start with Claire. Claire's the mother of Camille and Lena, the twins. And in episode 1, the first time that we see Claire, she is sat in this top left-hand image. She's sat on a bed in a bedroom, and within the centre of the frame is this almost shrine-esque depiction. We've got 2 candles that are being lit in a photo, and Claire is straightforwardly just looking at this image. Now, we later learn that Camille has died, and hence Claire is obviously still feeling a little bit of grief that her daughter died. But what is worth noticing is that the subsequent scene that we see Claire in, she closes the door to Camille's bedroom and goes into Lena's. Now, Lena, we can see stereotypical teenager, clothes everywhere. Claire just stands there, looks around, but then she hears Camille. All right, so that off-screen diegetic sound, it kind of grabs her and she ends up leaving the room. But the first 2 settings that we are introduced to Claire are her daughter's bedrooms. Not her own sphere. She's not sat on a couch reading. She's not in a study. She's not in her own place. It's very much she is a mother first and foremost. And this is the stereotyping that we're expected to be clued into. All right, so just make sure that in terms of the mediation that's going on, you've got the mise-en-scène of the bedroom, the placement of the shrine, the placement of the messy clothes, and it very much gears up to having that motherly role. The second interpretation we can read into Claire's character is the love triangle. She becomes almost like the object of affection for her ex-husband, Jerome, and for her current beau, Pierre. All right, and we notice this when she hears Camille come in. Camille gets a sandwich, she goes upstairs back to the bathroom. All right, and she's like, whoa, dead daughter, what do I do? I'll call a man to come and sort it out. The first person she calls is Pierre. All right, Pierre declines the call. Jerome, ex-husband, picks it up and says, I'll be over there. All right, but it's that later on scene where Jerome and Claire are in the kitchen and Jerome notices Pierre walking down. It's like almost like this kind of like trigger for him. What's he doing here? And it's kind of almost like this like competitiveness between them. Claire is positioned as that love interest or something to argue over. All right, so mother, and then that sort of like relationship aspect. Further on in episode 1, we do see a lot of emotion. So when the twins encounter each other for the first time after Camille returns, and they see that hold on, Camille's still only 13, 14, and Lena's 18 years old. We've got this kind of like high-pitched wailing noise coming from both girls, and Camille screams for her mum. And so mum rushes up, and Claire is there. The body language is there. We've got this like a close-up or medium close-up shot that kind of reveals how close she is to her daughters. She grabs Camille, gives her a massive hug, and reaches out for Lena. So we've got this concept that obviously we've seen her being within the setting of being a mother, being the love interest, but now again, motherly role, being completely anchored within our head. She is the nurturer within that family. All right, she is taking care of her daughters. She's there when they need her. So interestingly, Van Zoonen is one of our theorists, and she was almost a pioneering feminist. She pointed out how feminist discourse often defines gender as binary because it's the inevitable consequence of sex differences. She nailed it, and she identified that femininity is portrayed as being emotional, prudent, cooperation, a sense of community, and being compliant. They are seen as more domestic, dutiful, and objectified. So far within Claire's representation, all right, she is very much the domestic and dutiful housewife. All right, not necessarily objectified. However, she is the love interest. She's the object of these men's affections. So although she's not objectified in a voyeuristic way, she does become almost something to fight over. All right. Whereas masculinity is seen as rationality, efficiency, competition, individualism, and ruthlessness. Men are seen as more independent, rule-breaking, and more of a spectacle rather than an object. Van Zoonen identified the fact that very few academics had questioned how gender roles were developed or even reinforced within society. I mean, you can consider the impact of the media that we now know has a fundamental impact on our society. So to her, the way that she's viewing the discourse surrounding this, she almost viewed that people seem to accept these stereotypes as being natural. However, Van Zoonen then said, hold on a second, gender is a construct and its meaning will depend on the cultural and historical context of any kind of given text. And as a result of that, they are going to shift and change. A little bit like what Hall said, all right, depending on where you're coming from, but they're not fixed. But this is within particular regards to gender representation. Okay, so just bear that in mind when you're talking about Claire, or if a female representation comes up, Van Zoonen and Claire is quite a nice point to talk about. Okay, our next character is Julie. The first time we see Julie, we've got this gorgeous panning shot that kind of like comes through the front or hallway of her flat or apartment. And it pans into her living room. And as it pans, we see Julie sitting on the couch. She's wearing glasses. But notice through that mise-en-scène, you've got all these props that have been used. The books are everywhere. They're on the shelves that take up a lot of our sort of like prominence within the centre of the frame. We can kind of see that she's a bit of a reader. And so the glasses, the books, is she academic? Is she that stereotypical geek? So is she being portrayed as quite clever within this? She's sitting there and we can hear through the diegetic sound that she's watching a horror film. It's quite heightened and it's quite at a bit of an emotive pace, and so she's sitting there alone. Is she kind of brave as well, watching horror films without the traditional popcorn that gets thrown in the air? But she's sitting there and it's fine. All of a sudden the phone rings and it's Mr. Costa. And we're told through Julie's dialogue that she says, yes, I can come and give you a jab. Straight away we're thinking occupation is something to do with healthcare. Is she a nurse? Is she almost like a carer that goes in, or healthcare professional? But what is interesting to note is the first time we see Julie is in her flat. She's not in a hospital environment. She's not rushed to her feet in the ER. It's very much a nurturing role within the community, and this is kind of like medical. Rather than a medical expert, it's a healthcare professional. So that dialogue is important to establish that yes, she is obviously clever, academic, and intelligent. However, keeping it in that kind of like the female gender roles, Julie is very much kept within that sphere. Now, this gorgeous wide shot of Julie is quite dark. She's at the bus stop after giving Mr. Costa his jab. And the wide shot is used purely because we have the non-diegetic sound, you know, that creepy music that's a little bit unsettling, that they use as leitmotif all the way through to suggest that something's not quite right. We've got this scene, wide shot, no one's around. It's empty. It positions Julie to be quite vulnerable, and especially when we see Victor walking up to that bus station or bus stop. I know that he's only a small child, but it's that non-diegetic sound that's kind of, as well with a wide shot, it does give off this Julie's very vulnerable right here kind of vibe. And that's exacerbated by this scene right here, this deep shot where Julie's sat on the bus, like in any other horror movie, and you get the stalker kind of sat behind. Obviously, Victor's not wearing a mask, but it does suggest, again, the empty bus and this kind of quite vulnerable positioning of Julie. So she's coming out as, first of all, intelligent, then she's a healthcare professional, not a doctor, as far as we know, all right, and then she's become quite like vulnerable, like a bit of a victim. All right, and this again is heightened through another wide shot as she and Victor leave the bus and Julie's walking home. Notice that the flat's not very well lit. It must be very late at night. You've got one singular lamp, but it kind of reveals that there is no one around. And again, she's on her own, and it's just these wide shots are used to show the vulnerability of our female character. And then this one is quite interesting. This is where Victor then arrives at the apartment. He doesn't say anything, but the neighbour kind of interrupts Julie's question of Victor, and Victor places himself side by side, and we have this close-up shot of their hands. Julie, she doesn't push him away. She looks down at him, but she keeps hold of his hand, again suggesting that she's there almost like to protect him from this neighbour, to be there for him, to look after him because he doesn't have anyone else. And so we've got Claire as a motherly role, nurturing, and now we've got Julie, because she was by herself and now she's thrown into that nurturing role. All right, so you can kind of see how these stereotypes are kind of like doubling up across our characters. Now, what is interesting is later on in episode 2, we are given this image. Julie's in the bathroom, she's getting dressed, and the camera tilts down as she's getting undressed. She's taking her top off, and we're presented with this kind of like very close up shot of her stomach area, and we can kind of see these scars, these slashes, where we know we've seen the episode. So sorry, no, I hope there's no spoilers here, but we know that Sergei, the attacker, and we kind of in our head link these two. And the reason I'm showing you this one is because Julie, academic, she's intelligent, she's a healthcare professional, and it starts getting a little bit lower and lower. She becomes quite vulnerable, and now she's portrayed as being a victim. All right, and so she starts off really well, but ends up becoming a female. All right, or very much feminized role. Your next character is Adele. Now, the first time that we are shown Adele's character is through the use of Simon's character. Now, Simon goes from pillar to post to try and find his fiancée. I don't think he's twigged at this stage that he is dead or has come back from the dead. And we see him walk towards the house that he now knows that she's moved to. And there's a very open window, no curtains, despite being very dark outside and very light inside. And we're positioned with this over-the-shoulder shot as Simon walks towards Adele's house. And we're positioned to voyeuristically observe, all right, from a heterosexual male's point of view. And we see Adele looking very much like a bride. She's wearing her wedding dress, and she's obviously staring at herself. She wouldn't dress up for no reason, so it's obviously some kind of desire. She's getting married soon, but the fact she's dressing up, she's having a look at the mirror, it's obviously something that she wants. She wants to be a wife. Right, and to be married. We don't know who to, but again, to fulfill this like traditionally, let's grow up, let's get married kind of role. So conservative, very traditional views. Later on in the narrative, we know that she was meant to marry Simon. She obviously didn't, because Simon had an accident and was ultimately killed within it. or if you watch even later, there's more to the story. But it's this kind of like unsettling feeling that we are positioned voyeuristically over the shoulder of Simon. Laura Mulvey, she's not a named theorist on our specification, but she is useful to know. She said in 1975 that the male gaze invokes the sexual politics of the gaze and suggests a sexualized way of looking that empowers men and objectifies women. She says that the male gaze, women are visually positioned as that object of a heterosexual male's desire. And we, the audience, are therefore positioned as a heterosexual male. She breaks it down in a little bit more detail, and she tells us that the gaze affects obviously how men see women, how women see women, and how women then see themselves. And it's a cascading effect of what a patriarchal producer and the effects that it has on this kind of like male-dominated media sphere. So I'm going to take Laura Mulvey's concept back to this idea when we've got this over-the-shoulder shot of Simon as he's viewing voyeuristically Adele for the first time since he's returned. And we even get like these kind of like creepy vibes, for want of a better word, when Adele kind of almost twigs that she's being watched. And again, that non-diegetic music, it's unsettling, and it's telling us that this isn't right. In terms of the gender divide now, we'll look more at Simon later on, but the first time that we see Simon's interaction with Adele is when he's obviously stared at her for a little bit more, but then he's like, he wants to obviously have some kind of contact with her. So he bangs on the door quite violently, like he's pounding and pounding and pounding. You can see the dialogue there. So he says, "I know you're there, open the effing door." And it's just this kind of intimidating, almost hypermasculine representation of Simon. But we're not going to focus on that for just this section. We're going to be having a look at Adele's representation. Now she, on the other side of the door, is screaming, "Leave me alone." She goes, "No!" She doesn't want to believe that Simon's there. Is this a stereotype of femininity? Is it almost like emotional hysteria? Obviously Simon is pounding on the door aggressively and she's screaming, then she's emotional, she's crying, she sits in a heap on the floor sobbing. All right, so we can kind of see the differences in the emotional spheres of our gender, or our binaries, if you like. Then we've got this, I told you that she ends up slumping to the floor, she's in tears, and her daughter comes down the stairs. And we know it to be her daughter because she says "mum" as she's walking down the stairs. So we know, again, a little bit like Julie, we've got this image of a woman. We presume she's single, she wants to get married, and lo and behold, she's a nurturer. She's got a child already. She just needs to take that next step to fulfill the kind of like the traditional, this is what it means to be a grown woman, be married, have kids. All right. What's interesting about Adele is that in terms of Julie's job, well, Claire's job is a housewife. Julie's job is a healthcare professional as opposed to like a doctor. And then we've got Adele's job. She's a librarian. All right. So again, this is quite a stereotypical female role. And again, it just kind of just softens who she might be. Our second named feminist theorist is Judith Butler. She tells us that being born male or female does not determine the behaviour. She's very clear that it's people, it's society. We learn how to behave in particular ways to conform. The idea of gender is not determined, it's an act, it's a performance. It's these repeated rituals that we go through that society then understands as being normal. All right, and therefore it becomes this social construction. All right, gender isn't really a thing. Sex is. So you've got males and females born at birth, but what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a masculine male? So in terms of having these preconceived ideas of what gender is, she says it's a social construct. If we took away those labels, took away stereotyping, took away what it means for why can't blokes wear dresses? Why can't we all wear the same thing? Why can't we all do the same things? And if we took away those barriers, we would notice that gender is a performance, hence her gender performativity. And this links quite nicely to, obviously, our previous characters through this ritual performance, being the housewife, being vulnerable, being the victim. All right, but now we've got Kate. Now, Kate is almost like a secondary character. She's not one of the main ones in that first episode. She takes on a bigger role in later episodes. The camera kind of starts panning. All right, Kate's not in the centre of the frame. As it starts panning, what we do see is Jerome, Lena and Camille's dad, and he's doing up his belt. And then he takes out his wallet, looks for some cash and hands it over to Kate. So we are presuming with the belt, with the cash, that he is paying Kate for sex. All right, so she becomes almost like a prostitute in a way, very much perceived to be a demeaning role and negative. We don't often see male prostitutes. So again, it is fulfilling this stereotype: man buys woman for sex kind of thing. Again, objectifying her, becoming something that she can be, basically she can be bought. All right, so interesting to note that's the first time we see Kate. The second time Tony allows her to leave the bar early and close up. She's walking home. Notice again the gorgeous wide shot. All right, no cars, no people, vulnerable. It's literally screaming. We've got the music building up. She's walking out of the light. All right, and it becomes this almost like victim moment. So very, very vulnerable. She walks down the stairs to the underpass, and we see Kate very much in the centre as the camera kind of like her. So we see this figure lurking in the background in black clothing, obviously, just because it adds that sense of mystery. And she's walking towards this figure. It's unsettling. The music is telling us something's going to happen. And then lo and behold, she gets attacked by the mystery man in black. Now, what is brilliant about Kate's character? Okay, yes, she's portrayed quite negatively at the start. She doesn't get a lot of screen time in the episode, but she gets attacked. Now, in that top left-hand image, you can actually see, it's a medium close-up, but you see her bare her teeth and bite into Sergei's arm. All right, she's fighting back. She's not just being a victim and kind of rolling over and say, yes, stab me, stab me. She fights back, and she even gains possession of the knife, and she thrusts it into Sergei's stomach. All right, and we see him kind of like hunch over as a result of that powerful strike. All right, so she fights back, and it's kind of like, this is almost quite countertypical. She's not going to be a victim. It's all well and good. But she stares in horror. She's like, what have I done? All right, and so this countertypical moment where she's fighting back and you want her to leg it and get out of the frame and get to safety. No, she just stands there mortified. I've just stabbed someone, and it allows Sergei to, yes, let her become a victim. And we're seeing this repeated pattern with our females through this episode, that they're vulnerable, they're victims. And it's just, again, this reinforcement, these stereotypes. All right, and then that bird's eye view as we're positioned over Kate's body to see her eventual demise. The final character, and this is only one slide for this one, is Madame Costa. We see her very, very briefly throughout, but this is the main scene where Mr. Costa he's burning all the photos. He obviously called Julie for a jab. Something's not quite right. Something's upset him. Lo and behold, his dead wife's back from the dead. And so what does Mr. Costa do? Because he's got that power play, despite him being older, he manages to bound our female. So her arms are strapped to the bed. She's gagged. So he's overpowered her, strapped her down, burns the apartment down. And if that's not screaming victim at you and like being almost like submissive to that male character, obviously, why isn't she able to fight back? She's younger than old Mr. Costa, who's got like a dodgy health problems because he needs a jab. But yeah, she's still tied up and seen to be a victim. All right, so that's representation of females. All right, the next little video will be on representation of men, and then representation of age and representation of issues. Hope it's been useful, but I would recommend that you go back through, rewatch the episode, and just make a note of all your media and language to show how these representations have been constructed. Thank you guys. Take care. Bye.